Monorepos have been gaining a lot of popularity recently, and with that comes a lot of interest from people to learn more about them and actually see if they're a good fit for their own projects. Unfortunately, there aren't many sources on the internet that teach you about monorepos and provide some good tips and best practices to build one that is maintainable. Now, in its basic definition, a monorepo is just a way for us to contain multiple projects into one Git repository and at the same time allow us to share code between these projects. That helps us avoid a lot of code duplication between projects. But often than not, you actually don't need a monorepo until you get to a scale that you start needing multiple projects and you start actually needing to have what we call packages in a monorepo. And so with this video, I aim to give you the basic concept of a monorepo in a theoretical way to help you know more about them and to also help you in deciding when you actually start needing a monorepo in your project. Now, to understand monorepos, we firstly have to understand the complete opposite of one, which is a polyrepo. Now, a polyrepo is just one project in one Git repository, for example, just one Next.js app. Now, this can scale indefinitely, but it all depends on your company requirements. For example, we can just have a Next.js application with components or rich text editor, UI, and API all in the source folder, and that would be fine. We start needing a monorepo once we scale to more projects. For example, what if we now want a marketing website? And what if we want to share some UI components between our marketing website and our Next.js application? Now, let's imagine we have an imaginary company called Acme. Now, we will just make a new Git repository and we're going to name that Acme's UI library. Now, we will just publish the code to NPM and we're going to let both the Next.js application and the marketing website download from NPM that package. Now, this works, and this is a way that a lot of companies architect their projects. There is nothing wrong with this. The problem comes from the speed of the changes that we want to make. For example, what if we want to just simply change the color of our button in the UI library? Now, we have to actually make that change in the UI library. We have to publish it to NPM, and then we have to go individually into both applications and upgrade that version and install the package. This is a lot of steps for such a simple change. And this is when we need to start thinking about transitioning to a monorepo setup. Now, let's say we actually move to a monorepo. How would that look like? Well, a good standard is to have your applications in a apps folder and your packages, for example, our UI library, in a packages folder. Now, with that setup, you can see there are multiple package JSONs for every application and every package, but we also have a root package JSON. And this is because every package manager for the NPM ecosystem comes with what we call a workspace feature. Now, this allows you to have multiple package JSONs in one code base, and you would have a root package JSON. And with that, you really unlock the power of a monorepo. So we can actually dedupe a lot of the common node module dependencies. So let's say that our web, marketing, and UI library all are using React. We actually don't need to install React 3 times. It will just take the React package and hoist it to the root node modules. But if our web application only depends on a unique package, we actually don't need to put it in our root node module. So it's just going to live in the node modules inside apps web. But more importantly, what your workspace feature of the package manager allows you to do is to install your packages inside of each other. So, for example, we know that our web and marketing apps need to import some components from our UI package. Well, we can just set our UI package as a dependency of apps web and apps marketing, and your package manager will just install it locally instead of trying to see if it's on the NPM registry. And so with that, if we want to change the color of our button inside of the UI package? Well, we just do the code change and it's right there. Often than not, your package manager symlinks the entire package. So for example, your package's UI will just be symlinked to the apps web and apps marketing node modules folder. And so with every code change in the UI package, it's just immediately reflected in your apps. More importantly, once we commit our new button color to the repository, we're now sure that both of our applications will use the same code and they will look the same because they will be using the same version of the UI package. Another massive advantage of using a monorepo architecture is that we can actually streamline our tooling around all of our different projects, and with that we can get, for example, the same lint rules and the same formatting rules, so on and so forth, to have the same code style. And that would look something like this, where we're gonna have a config folder inside of our packages folder, and we're just gonna dump each individual tool configuration in there. So we're gonna have a separate ESLint configuration package, a separate txconfig presets package, and a separate Tailwind package too. And so with that, if all of our projects use the same Tailwind config from our Tailwind config package, we actually only need to do changes in one place to get that configuration change for all of our projects. Now with that, the big question is, should I just move everything to be a monorepo in case that I scale to be that big and I need multiple projects? And the simple answer is no, you actually don't need a monorepo. You want to delay the move to a monorepo for as long as possible. Moving to a monorepo setup comes with a lot of challenges, and one of these is the maintainability of the different configurations. Once we start adding a lot of tools like vtest, playwright, ESLint, storybook, prettier, so on and so forth, just managing the config of all of these throughout the workspace is a lot, and a lot of times it ends up being a pain to upgrade some of these packages and to keep the monorepo in good working order. There is also a massive disadvantage with monorepos in that because you are containing multiple projects in the same code repository, once you do a code change, well, your CI pipeline is going to need to build every single application. It's going to need to build every single package, and that will make your CI pipeline become a lot slower. However, there are ways to get around this. We can use NX or Turborepo, which are basically smart build systems. So what they do is, let's say we only have a change in apps web, well, they're gonna figure out that we actually don't need to rebuild the marketing application. We don't need to also rebuild the UI package. And so in your CI pipeline, they will just skip building them because we know that the code hasn't changed, and so the output will be the same. Not only that, but we also have to acknowledge that monorepos are suited for teams. It's not something that you will typically do for your own side project. And so in teams, you don't want to slow down your colleagues. For example, if you make a simple change in the marketing app, you actually want to share that cache. So if, for example, you do a simple change in the marketing app, well, NX and Turborepo are going to figure out that the next person in your team that tries to build the entire monorepo, well, his code didn't change from the last cache that we have, and so he's not going to rebuild the entire monorepo. He's only going to rebuild the marketing app. And so with these two, you get the speed of using just a normal polyrepo setup while also having the scalability of a monorepo. Now, which one do you choose? There is a lot of people that advocate for NX and a lot of people that advocate for Turborepo. I personally don't actually care. You can use any of them. They do the same job and both of them do it quite well. There isn't a disadvantage to any of them from the other one, and there isn't an advantage as well to the other one. Well, there are advantages between one another, but it's small things, and generally you're gonna be happy with both of them. Now, we have to specifically talk about NX because they have something called integrated monorepos. Integrated monorepos are very different from what I just explained, where we actually don't depend on the package manager to do our workspace. We instead use TypeScript. Through path aliases, we can let packages know about where to target each other. We still need to build each one individually once we actually need to publish it, for example, to NPM still. Integrated monorepos really shine if you don't want to maintain your own monorepo. And the reason behind this is that NX supplies you with a lot of plugins, and what these plugins do is that they generate entire packages and code for you. They handle the rough part of a monorepo for you, so they maintain the configuration and they only just let you focus on building. You can still customize the configuration, but a lot of people are hesitant about one approach to the other one. Is it better to go with an integrated monorepo or a package-based monorepo? And quite frankly, the simple answer to that is, what do you expect to do with your own monorepo setup? Do you expect to maintain the entire configuration, or do you want to delegate that to a tool that will just take care of everything? But you're gonna have to buy in to how they do things and their own architecture. This is a perfect solution for a small team that need to be a monorepo because they have multiple projects, but they don't want to maintain their own monorepo. NX will help keep your configurations up to date because they also handle migrating your tooling to the next version. In conclusion, it's based on your own personal preference. There isn't really a disadvantage to one style as opposed to the other one, and there isn't also an advantage to any of them. I will link the documentation to both approaches down below, and you can just make a decision for yourself, but just know that any decision that you go with, it will typically work well for you. But just as a note, I prefer package-based monorepos because I am a person that likes to have full maintainability over my code base. I want to configure everything and I want to manage everything in my code base and make sure that it works for my specific use case. Now, with that said, I have 5 of my own personal tips with dealing with a package-based monorepo. And the first one is to always plan for the future, not the current time when you're doing anything to your monorepo in terms of its actual setup. It might be tempting to copy paste the Tailwind config from 2 different applications rather than making a package dedicated for the Tailwind config, but often than not, with you adding more packages and you adding more applications, you will need to do that, and you don't know when the time comes to actually need to do that if you're gonna have a harder time because you waited for too long and now both of your Tailwind configurations are apart from each other and they are different. So just generally any tool configuration, so TypeScript, ESLint, Tailwind, vtest, Playwright, just make a dedicated package for these and import them from your different app projects. Now for the third tip is that PNPM does have the best workspaces support. I have fully switched to PNPM because of the way they just handle node modules. The amount of power that you get in PNPM workspaces is above any other package manager. And just another tip, in PNPM workspaces, if you set prefer workspace packages to true in the npm rc file, that will just make sure that it will always pull from your local packages in the workspace, even if you publish these packages to npm. This comes in handy once you start publishing packages to npm for external people to use, but you also have your own monorepo where you need things to work together as well in the workspace. And for my next tip is to rely on NX and Turborepo to cache your tasks heavily. You don't want to have false positives and false negatives, but you do want to always cache when you can, because at the end of the day that will save you on your CI pipeline time. It will also save your work colleagues a lot of time in rebuilding and linting and all of that, your entire workspace. And so just make sure that you are caching every task that you can cache. And for my last tip, you actually can have packages in workspaces that only are dependent upon by one application. This could be for a lot of reasons. For example, just having a better separation of concerns. We might have a dedicated editor team, for example, that only work on the product's rich text editor, but we don't want everyone to work on this, and so we can make it into its own package. Now, with that, do we need to build a package? Often than not, you actually don't need to. A lot of the times, for example, frameworks like Next.js support transpiling the package on the fly, so you don't need to ship the compiled JavaScript. They will do that at their end. You just have to point the package to the source TypeScript files and Next.js will take over from that. I will link in the description the documentation about Next.js's transpile packages option. And so with that comes my final statement about monorepos, and that's to just practice as much as you can. You're not gonna get a monorepo right from the first 10 times that you're gonna make one, and you're always gonna have edge cases that you didn't account for in the previous iteration. And that's why you actually need to build more monorepos to figure out what to do and how to make it better. If you do, however, want to check out a monorepo setup that I personally consider one of the best out there as an example of a monorepo, I would highly recommend checking Julius's Acme Corp. I'm gonna link it down in the description and you can see it. But it's a monorepo that contains stuff like Tailwind, TRPC, Next.js, React Native, and a lot more. And with that, we come to the end of this video. I hope I made you more interested in the world of monorepos. It's really satisfying getting a really good monorepo setup that makes you more efficient, and utilizing the different packages and stuff, you start sharing a lot of code between each other. It's generally just a very satisfying feeling. So I hope that video kickstarts your monorepo journey and to kind of give you the motivation to start building your own monorepos. But again, only really use monorepos in production if you actually need them, and if you're in a team or you're building a very complex product. Anywho, I've taken a lot of your time now, so I'm gonna let you go, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye bye.